Hi, this is Julie Pettyjohn with another video for ProStitcher users. On the quilt I'm working on today, I have to quilt outside of the boundaries of the quilt top, and I also have to crop the first row. So I thought I would go ahead and video what I'm doing and give you my tips for how I do this. I have a customer who always asks me to quilt out into the batting, and she likes to have 5 inches on every side. She does that because she likes to make a 2.5 inch border combined with binding. She'll take that 5 inches, turn it over and stitch that to the quilt, mitering the corners, and that's how she does her binding. To prepare for this quilt, I'm first going to go to my computer and ProStitcher simulation, and I'm going to bring in Sea of Stars by My Creative Stitches. That's what the customer asked for. And the first thing I notice is that my start and stop are at the bottom, and that just makes it hard repositioning. So I'm going to go to Modify and Rotate, and I'm just going to flip the design so that puts my start and stop up at the top. And then the next thing I'm going to do is set an area, a 2-point area. And I know that this quilt is 58 inches wide, and with my 5 inches on both sides, that's going to make it 68. So I'm going to want to change my width to 68. Now my length of the quilt is 72, and I'm going to need then 82 inches on my quilting. However, I don't know if you've watched my videos before, but I usually repeat the same 1 to 3 rows over and over. So I'm going to set this at 40 inches. I never use a full length of a quilt. And I usually do 30 to 35, but this time I'm going to use 40 because I know that Sea of Stars is about 12 inches long to begin with. Now I'm going to change that in just a second. But I'm going to get this area set so that I have something to visually see to begin with. And I'm going to pull my design down into that area. And I do want to resize it. It's probably not bad as it is, but it's like, it's pretty, it's like, no, I think it's like, I don't know, it's 12 inches long. And I have a 20-inch Amara, and I really like to work with something smaller, somewhere around 10 inches. So I'm going to resize this. I'm going to have to go to Modify and to Resize, and I'm going to lock the aspect ratio, and I'm going to click on height this time because that's what is more of concern to me with my throat space, and I'll take that down a bit. And then also, a lot of times I like to add the grid. I don't like the grid on very much because it just looks messy to my eyes, but it is really helpful when I'm trying to get an idea of how big something is. Like I can look on here, and the larger square represents an inch. The little tiny squares in that is a 1/4 inch. So I can look and say, those little curls and kind of swirly ribbons are just about a 1/4 inch or less on some of them. And so I don't want to go any smaller than that. But now the evening star, that star right there, it's about like 1, 2, 3.5 of those big squares, so 3.5 inches. But that sounds good. This is going to be dense, but I know this customer is all right with dense. So, you know, this might not be too bad. However, it's a little bit on the small side. I might want to look at, well, what if I go just maybe one more click bigger? Look at the difference. There's not much difference there, but I'm going to go with the 1 click bigger. And now I'll turn my grid off. And I'm going to hit the home button because that takes everything out where I can see it better. And I'm going to go to repeat and horizontally repeat this. Now after I click, if the point to point doesn't highlight, I'm going to click that. It's an old habit. I'm not sure if I still need to do it, but I do. And I'm going to repeat this design. Now if I were on my tablet, I would be concerned about doing some cropping and everything here, but this is to get this ready for my tablet. And I take these off because I forgot to save this design. And I have the design, the original one, but what I want to do is save my selected design, and I go to save, and oh, it wants me to save it as workspace. Well, that's because I didn't baseline it. So just go back, baseline, and then, so I'm going to go in here, and I discover, oh, I don't have my, my flash drive on here. But, you know, that's okay. I can save it in my working folder on my hard drive and then just take it over later. Usually I like to just put it straight onto the flash drive. But for now, since it's not down there, I'm going to go back up a ways and try to find my working folder. And that's what I'm going to put it in. Now, normally I like to save on my flash drive. I bring in the design just as it is, and I save it with the name, the number 1, and then OG for the original. And then after I've resized it, if I do resize it, I save it by the name, Sea of Stars 1, because there's only one, it's not a whole big design, and I put resized. This is just my method. This is how I do it. I always have an OG, well, not always because I didn't this time, but usually have an OG and a resized. Then I'm going to make it into the full pantograph. Now, pantograph is an old-fashioned term, sort of, from the days of having a real paper pantograph, meaning our whole entire design, but I still use it. So after I save this as resized, then I'll go back and I'll repeat, just like I did before, and I'll get what I like to call the pantograph, or panto for short. So now I'm going to repeat again. And as I was saying earlier, I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bigger than it needs to be. And then when I get out to the quilt, to the long arm, that's when I'll crop it and everything. Because, you know, I can measure that quilt, and I go in and I put that area to what I think the measurements are. But it's better when I'm out there and I can actually line my needle up where it needs to go and then crop it where I really want it to crop. So now I'm going to repeat this vertically. So now I want to close that gap between those two because I don't want a lumpy bit of fabric there. So I'm going to click the negative on the vertical gap and close that up. Now that I have the first two where I want them, any repeats will have what I want to continue. So I'm going to go ahead, do that, and I'm going to baseline that. And then I'm going to need to save this. So I'm going to go to Save and Select it. Make sure I'm in my working folder. I'll click on this, and I'm going to clear that big long name here and click in that bar so I can type the name that I want to save it as Sea of Stars Panto, and I'm going to name it Master. I feel like you'd be surprised how important it is to save this master, because there are times when I get on my tablet and I get at the quilt and I say, hey, this really isn't just how I want it. Oh, I sure wish I had an original that I could work with. And there are times, have you ever been quilting and you get like 4 or 5 rows down and suddenly the quilt's a little bigger than you thought it was? It wasn't that size at the top, and you wish you had just a little more space because now you might have a crop showing up on the side where you don't want it. So what you can do is bring the master in, lay it right on top of that design you have, then select the first one that you had and delete that. Then you have the master there, and then you can crop again, so that can give you just, you know, like another 1/2 inch or something that you want. So this is how I get everything ready to take over to my long arm. So I'll see you at the long arm. First, to get an accurate 5-inch measurement beyond the quilt, I'm going to use this measure tool. Now, I'm going to show you a video of that in just a little bit and demonstrate exactly how to use it. But just know that whenever you click on it, you will have zero set for your x-axis and your y-axis, and as you move your machine and your needle, the numbers will change, and that's how you get your measurements. Here's what's already been done at the long arm. First, I chose a 1/4 inch basting stitch, and I set my channel locks horizontally so I would get a plumb or straight line, and I went across the top of the batting. Using the measure tool and ProStitcher, I measured down from the top line 5 inches and then did another stitch straight, and number 3, I lined up the top of the quilt on the lower stitch line and centered it on the batting and backing. Here are a few other photos just to give you an idea of what we are starting out with. On this first pass, I'm not going to worry about getting exactly 5 inches to the left of this quilt, or the 5 inches to the right. I'm going to go a little farther, and she can just trim that off later. But I am going to put my needle right at the very top where I want everything to start. And you know, where the needle is where our crosshairs meet. So when I bring in the design, the start point will be right where my needle is. So I have that positioned exactly where it needs to be, just by setting it there before I even bring in the design. Now I'm going to set my area on the quilt, and I'm going to do a 2-point area. So I'm going to start right where I'm at, and then I'm going to have to move the machine to the right, to the far front of the machine. This is just like you normally do with any quilt. This part is not so different, except that I am going past the quilt and I am going, even further. I know it's farther than 5 inches this first time. Now let's take a look at the tablet. And you can see my area. Okay, I need to make that longer, just like I did on the computer. So I'm going to go into the length and I'm going to change that to 40, just like I did on our computer in simulation. Okay, now I'm going to crop that part because, like I said, it could be wider than 5 inches. That wasn't a problem. But I believe that's so much that it could run off the edge of our backing. So I do want to crop that. So I'm going to go to Modify and Crop. And then close the edges and crop the outside. Now I want to baseline this, and then I'm going to save it. Now this is my method once again, and this part is important to me. I'm going to save this as the Sea of Stars Panto Crop 1. And every time I save a new crop, it would be 2, 3, 4. But it's also that number 1 reminds me that I really need to take a look at row 1, because row 1 may be cropped, and it is. And so I'm going to go to View and take the area off so you can see this. Now, this isn't the best example to show you of a cropped top. In this case, it's just the top of these little stars that has been cut off. You can see the stars below, they have a long point, but I do not want this crop to show up on my second and third rows. Now we're just going to start as we always do. Get ProStitcher and run and proceed. And let's watch it do some of the stitch out. Normally, I do base the top of the quilt down, but this time I was thinking, well, I would like her to have a little less stitching along there to deal with, so I'll just pin it and kind of babysit that very first pass, and that way I was a little worried that even with the glide foot on, that it might kind of squish the quilt or move it off the mark. I certainly didn't want it to get over on a pin, so I thought, well, I'll just babysit it, I'll take care of it. In hindsight, I think I should have just gone ahead and basted it like I normally do, because after I did that first pass, I realized I didn't want to stand there for every single bit babysitting that quilt. So I do stay close by, keep an eye on it, but I don't want to have my hands on every bit of it if I don't have to. So, I probably should have basted that, but just to give you an idea there. And also I realize it's not as easy to see these stitches as I thought it would be, so I'll see what I can do about helping you out on that and maybe do a little editing. But keep watching, and I'm going to show you how to use that measure tool in a moment. Let's speed this up a little bit so you don't have to watch in slow motion. We're now at the end of the first pass on the quilt. You can see the long jump pause that always comes up. And what I'm going to do then is to cut my threads and move my machine over to the left. And then I'm going to choose resume, the green button there. Give the machine a little bit of help by moving it on over to the correct side. And then I'm going to choose the resume. Now the needle's going to go down and up, and there's going to be a thread there, and I'm going to put a pin in that, and that tells me where I want to start my next row. Typically what I will do is advance the quilt and then reposition my first row right on top of where that pin is entering, and I'll just keep repeating the first row over and over and over. And then I always push cancel, and as you can see though, I don't want to do that. We talked about this before. See my little cropped areas up here at the top on those little stars? I don't want to have little cut off points on every row. So this is what I'm going to do to avoid that. Whenever we're cropping the first row, I need to move that start point, and I need to move it down. So I'm going to go to ProStitcher, New Start and End. And then I'm going to use the selection key over here for my start to go down one, and it's going to go down one row. Now if I just left it like that, I have that problem solved for one time. But I don't want to make the mistake of accidentally ever stitching that first row again. So I'm going to go to modify, crop, and this time I'm going to crop between the start and the end. And that is how I just remove that first row. And then I'm going to have to save this with a new name. So I'm going to baseline and I'm going to save it. And I'm going to save it as Sea of Stars Panto Crop 2. So I will know that that is my newest save, and I'm cropping it on the second row where there is no, or I'm saving it starting at the second row, where there is no crop. So that's going to keep me from restitching that first row. I found it's better to just get rid of the thing because I have accidentally stitched a first row with a much worse crop than that before and had to pick it all out. So then if you're like me, every now and then I advance that quilt and I've advanced it too much. So it's a really good idea to always check. Make sure you do have enough clearance to get your stitches in there where they need to go and not hit the bar. So I have to just pull it back just a little bit. I'm going to hover the needle and the laser pointer right over where the pin went in. And then I'm going to have to reposition. So I'm going to go modify, and I'm going to change it to reposition, and I want to reposition it at the start point. Those crosshairs are the start point. The crosshairs represent right where my needle is. So when I reposition that, I've got that second row ready to stitch. And that's what I'm going to do for the rest of the quilt. But first, let's use that measure tool. And let's do that so that we can set up the extra 5 inches on each side of the width that we know we want to stitch. Once I've selected the measure tool, when I move my machine, the X and the Y axis will show numbers. So when you see that I'm at 5, then that's 5 inches. That is where I want to be from where I started. Now, if you ever push the measure tool and you want to get a measurement one place and then you go to another place and you want to get a measurement there, it's not going to work until you take that green off of the measure tool. So deselect it and then select it again where it goes green again, and then you will start again with zeros as your X and Y axis. You want to first start with 0 on both of them. Notice this large number like 58 over here. That's because I didn't deselect my measure tool. So then you see that I deselected it, and now I'm going to select it again so I can get my 0 axis set. Deselecting and reselecting measure tool resets the axis numbers to 0, and as I move my machine over, then you could see the number 5, and that's where the machine is. So that is 5 inches over from that right border. So now I want to select area, and I believe I have selected area over on the left side already. I just had gone to the view and taken that area off, but I do have my area now where I want to crop it. So now I will need to do what I did earlier. You can see the area box now, and I'm going to have to go over to the height and make that taller so I don't crop off the bottom. But then I can now go to modify and crop, and I can save this new cropped area as crop 3, I believe. And then we're ready to go on with the whole rest of the quilt. I completely forgot to get a picture of the finished quilt, but I did have a very happy customer pick up her quilt this morning, and she loved it, and I'm sure the family who is receiving it will love to have it too. Thank you so very much for watching this. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.